Top 5 random thoughts. Just had these today. Thought I would put them forward of just kind of big stories maybe around college football. And we can have a short little discussion about them here for the top 5. Number 5. Can Penn State really win the Big Ten? Are they that good yet? New quarterback. He was there last year in Drew Aller. Noah Singleton, the running back, is well thought of. They've got some transfers in that should make them, a lot better on offense and a more even. But this is a schedule that is at Ohio State, Michigan at home. Those two things would, if they lost those two games, it keeps them from winning the Big Ten. I'm not sure, if the roster is there yet, and I guess we'll see, but they're getting a lot of hype that this might be the team that James Franklin kind of gets out of the last couple years of just not getting where he wants them to be. And that might be third place in the Big Ten this year because of the two teams ahead of them. But they've got an interesting schedule. I'm just not sure if this is the year for the hype train on Penn State yet.
It seems like it that this is, if there's a year. That doesn't mean it can't be next year. It's kind of like Michigan trying to knock the door down, and finally they did. But about the time Penn State's ready to, they don't have to just deal with Ohio State. They have to deal with Michigan and Ohio State.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. Drew Aller, I understand why people were super stoked about him. Last year there was a lot of calls for him at times. Just wanting to see something a little bit different. And there's certainly a lot of hype for him and for this team. But, yeah, I'm not ready to put them above of Michigan or Ohio State yet at this point. That's just their division. That's not the Big Ten. That's their division. So, I think it's entirely possible. Don't get me wrong. But am I banking on it? No. But, yeah, that's going to be an interesting story to watch. I think, and again, the Big Ten has to figure it out because there's two more teams since they made the schedule. But in the, whatever the Super Rivalry +1 schedule, whatever name of it is now, Penn State will be better off in that there will be years where they'll be able to weave through and not have to play both Ohio State and Michigan at the same time. Right. And, now, granted, now with the league being so big, you might trade off like, oh, we don't have to play Ohio State and Michigan this year. Okay, here's USC and Oregon. So maybe it's not – you're not really going to be able to avoid all that. But if your matchups are better and you can get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room for a year, maybe that sets you up in a shot to where you can be in that position to win the Big Ten. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know that everybody really thought out all that much before all of the moves were made of the scheduling issues that come with this. Because, yeah, now you were guaranteed to get Michigan and Ohio State every year, and now you're not. And is there years where you don't get them either? One, because there's just so many teams that you have to – they got to play USC at some point. They got to play Oregon at some point. How's all that going to work? Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. But, yeah, they're going to be really good. They're going to win a bunch of games. I think your baseline is like 9 wins probably for this team. But I'm not surprised if a lot of people are shooting higher than that. But, yeah, there's just a couple of big juggernauts in front of them that I'm not ready to just leap over just yet. Number 4. Is Texas good enough to make the college football playoff? I think the answer is they're good enough to win the Big 12, but is the Big 12 a league that is going to not beat each other up enough to where the winner doesn't have 2 losses? That is, and the thing is for Texas is if they lose to Alabama and then they lose just 1 game in the Big 12, they're probably on the outside looking in. They have a better case than most people because they're Texas. But bottom line is, if you've got 2 losses, you're probably staring at 4th at best, and there might be a couple teams with 1 loss in there that will be above you. Yeah, the problem with 2 losses, like you said, you leave it up to what is everybody else also doing. Mm-hmm. Is there an undefeated Pac-12 champ or is there a 1-loss Pac-12 champ? Who did Texas lose to in that second game? Was it Iowa State in a clunker or was it TCU in triple overtime? I think that those will factor in as for the question. Yeah, I think they're good enough to make the college football playoff. I do. I think that they're rightfully the favorite in the Big 12 this year. I don't know that I'm, all in on yes, they are going to make the playoff because so many things are in their control, but also out of their control. But I do think they're good enough, yes.
Yeah, I do think that the Big 12 is just a tight enough league to where they can have a season where they look, even in say they beat Alabama, and then the hype train's really going to go there, but say they lose to Kansas State and TCU in really close games, they could look fantastic and be 10-2 and out on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
You know, like just how the league is. I think that they're a better team than most in the Big 12, but I don't think everybody else is so far behind them that it wouldn't surprise me if they did lose 2 games just because it's a good league.
Yeah, no, I'm got them, I think, just on paper at 10-2, losing to Alabama and then losing, an unspecified game, TCU probably or something along those lines. But yeah, I'm not banking on them going undefeated. But I am riding the hype train as far as them being, one of the better teams in the country and certainly out of the Big 12.
Yep. Number 3, can a Pac-12 team make the college football playoff this year? And the Pac-12 has maybe even a tougher problem than the Big 12 in that those teams might be tighter and better than the Big 12 when you're talking about Oregon, Washington, USC, Utah, all right there at the top of that league that might trade some losses, not to mention UCLA or Oregon State or Wazoo jumping in and upsetting some teams and putting them behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, going back to Penn State too, that's going to be really interesting to see them against West Virginia. Mostly because West Virginia is such a question mark about what they're going to look like, who their starting quarterback is, and man, they start off in Happy Valley, and that first month of the season for them is just absolutely brutal. But yeah, as far as the Pac, sure. I just don't know that it's going to be USC. I don't know that's where I go first. I think I do go more towards an Oregon, for example, of potentially winning it. But yeah, they've got a lot of great contenders. I think it's much more of a cluster of a race at the top than a lot of other conferences where you can kind of boil it down to probably 2 or 3 teams. I think there's like a handful of teams that all could, if things swing the right way, win the conference, not make the playoff. But I do think that, yeah, there's certainly a contender that could emerge from the Pac-12 and make the playoff.
Number 2, could Tennessee be good enough to win the SEC East? Now, this means upsetting Georgia and not really probably losing again. Georgia's probably going to lose a game this year because that's just mathematics, and it's hard to do what they're trying to do. But to win the SEC East, the Vols are going to have to run through and beat Georgia and not lose more than one other game and then win that head-to-head against Georgia. So it's going to be tough. I think they're going to be probably really good again. I'm really high on Joe Milton and what he can bring in that Josh Heupel offense, but Georgia and the Bulldogs are sitting right there. But depending on what Josh Heupel's done in this offseason to kind of rebuild the roster after Hendon Hooker, it's going to be Joe Milton, but losing Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt are both big-time wide receivers that have big roles already in their rookie season for their respective NFL teams. How do you rebuild that in a year? And could they be good enough to knock off Georgia in the SEC East? I wonder about this.
Yeah, I think the lag time for teams replacing a lot of talent is far lesser than it's ever been before, because of the transfer portal. So, yeah, with the talent they lost, or there's somebody else I was looking at last night, or it was like a TCU. If that had been in like 2015, there's no chance in hell I'm picking them to make anything. But now, let's get JoJo Earl. Let's get Brockermeyer. Let's get, and just load back on up. So, yeah, I think Tennessee is going to be in the mix. I just can't put them above Georgia in any way, shape, or form right now. But I do think they're going to be right there nipping at their heels and hoping for a stumble and hoping for an upset when those two meet. But you get Alabama and Georgia. And then, some other potentially interesting games, like how good is A&M? How good are they? But if I had to pick one upset in college football this year, this is totally out of the blue, but just thinking about it, just the reaction that there would be if UTSA rolled into Knoxville and upset the Vols, wouldn't that be something else, man? Can you imagine the reaction if that were to take place? So that's going to be an interesting game to see the Roadrunners travel up there, and I'm not banking on that, but if I could see, what if, that'd be really high at the top of the list.
They get them between Florida and South Carolina. South Carolina, a team that beat the brakes off of Tennessee last year, and Florida, who is arguably their biggest. I don't know who Tennessee's biggest rival is if you're a Tennessee fan. Florida's up there.
Florida's
right up there for Tennessee. Probably not their biggest, but one of their biggest in a game they super, super care about. So they sandwich right in there between a revenge game and a rivalry game. So if you're looking to sneak in when they may forget about you, that might.
The chaos lover in me would just love to see that because that would be some chaos. I'd say Alabama's a bigger rival for Tennessee.
Yeah.
But I would think that Florida's pretty high up there too. Yeah. But yeah, they're going to be good. I think Heupel's the real deal, man. I think the system that he runs is one that's going to last for a good long while for them in this current landscape. And yeah, they're going to be good, but I don't know about last year good. And the Hendon Hooker, not Hendon Hooker, but the Joe Milton, the hype over just his arm strength has like made the hype in general, I think, go kind of crazy. So I'm interested to see him play a game and throw really far, but also do a lot of the other things as well. So that's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah.
All right.
Number 1. Is this a traditional or transitional year for Alabama? I forgot to leave that part off, but is this a traditional Alabama team that just reloads and, they had their little dip for a minute last year where they lost a couple games, but they still looked really good? Or given all that they've had to replace and the youth, not that they won't be good, but will this be one of those Alabama teams that the fans don't really, like when they're listing all the good ones, they're like, we'll skip 2023 and we'll move on because Alabama in 2024 is probably going to be Alabama again. But they, for the first time in a long time, they don't know who the quarterback's going to be, and they're taking it right down to the wire, which has been kind of their thing for a long time, where it's this guy and 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 this guy. Now they've got a 3-way battle for the starting quarterback there. They were not great at the skill positions last year. By their standards. I mean, most people would have killed for who they had, but they're a little down on playmakers. The lines are still pretty raw. So there's, even Nick Saban has to hit the reset button every now and again. Now, his computer doesn't take as long to restart as ours do, but still, everybody has to hit Control-Alt-Delete sometimes, and this might be the year that they're doing it. But again, it wouldn't surprise me either way if Alabama's like a little bit like not Alabama this year, but still really good, or if Nick Saban just like, oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah. No, I hit reboot a long time ago. You guys just didn't notice.
They've won 10 or more games every year since 2007. And in that time period, they've only won 10 games or not more than that one time in that entire time period. So I know we're all waiting on the demise. Is Saban on the hot seat? But I do agree with you. I don't know that they're the juggernaut now. I think they've been supplanted by Georgia in that regard. I think they've got a lot of heat surrounding them within their own division, and the whole don't have a quarterback out of the 3-man group, and they're still just kind of wishy-washy on all that. That does make me raise my eyebrows a little bit. So, yeah, they just don't seem to be the almost unstoppable force that they've kind of been in years past.
Yeah, and look,
I think more people are hoping.
Yes, very much that.
I think
more than anything.
I've seen that from a lot of different fan bases in the SEC or the incoming schools from the Big 12. I think that there looks like there might be a slight crack only because of Georgia, who they lost to and how they lost last year. But I think there's more hope that he's sliding rather than evidence, unless we see something early on this year.
And I don't think it's
like week 2 against Texas.
Yes,
I don't think it's sliding necessarily. It's just, eventually you get caught up in everybody gets caught up in a numbers game where you've had enough people going in and out the door that you're just kind of in a group where not everybody's ready at the same time, and it takes time to build that. And so if they were if they were 10-3 this year and, lost to all the best teams that they play, that would not completely shock me. And then if they were 13-0 next year, winning the SEC and rolling back in a national championship because they went through this awful 10-3 that Nick Saban would go to, that just everybody gets a reset. It just, some people's are harder than others.